What's going on, guys? I know it's been a while since I've made any shop updates or videos for you, or really updated my channel at all, and I do apologize for that. But I was doing some work on my no-weld grinder sander tonight, and just wanted to make a real quick video and show you some modifications and repairs that I made. Now, over the years since I built this machine, I think I've made a couple of videos showing some various improvements and modifications I've made to the machine. From the time that I first built it, moving on to after I've used it for a while, and perhaps saw some room for improvement. Some of those things include beefing up this bolt here, using a slightly heavier spring, heavier brackets or straps to hold things in place, using a larger tube, placing the handles in slightly different spots, so on and so forth. I won't go through all those little details. If you want to see those, they're somewhere back in my channel. I couldn't even tell you what the video is called, but at any rate, what recently happened to me, and this is probably about the fourth time this has happened, was I lost a drive shaft on my no-weld grinder sander, and I believe I've made a video about this before as well. But what ends up happening is that the original design kind of has the drive wheel and a good portion of the drive shaft hanging past the outside pillow block bearing. This one I would refer to as the inside. The outside is normally located just on the other side of the 4-inch square tube, and what that leaves you with is probably about a good 4 or 5 inches of overhang on your drive shaft and your drive wheel. Which really is quite a bit of mass to be hanging past the bearing, especially when you add the tension of the belt and the spring and the force that you apply when you're grinding things. Well, it's really a recipe for failure, and it's something I really should have addressed from the start. And in fact, this is a modification that I would recommend for anybody with a no-weld grinder sander. I know the plans do call for space in them on the corners of the 4-inch base tube, but that's really not enough for the amount of length you have overhanging. And again, what happens is with that overhanging drive shaft, you will eventually start to develop some play as the shaft flexes. And what I found I believe was happening was anytime I would get a piece caught in between the belt and the work rest enough to cause the belt to come to a complete stop, that would often cause a belt break and cause that drive wheel an excessive amount of force and torque. And I think what was ending up happening there was that it was starting to flex so much that it bent and started spinning out of center. And what goes on to happen from there is that the vibrations start to increase, the bend in the shaft starts to increase, and ultimately you have a fracture or a failure of the drive shaft, normally somewhere around the bearing. At one point I even had the drive wheel come flying off of the machine. Normally I'm able to catch it because the machine wants to start walking its way off of the table, as was the case this time. But at any rate, that's caused from an overextended shaft and just too much leverage against the part that's hanging off past the bearing. So simple fix to that really isn't much more than just a couple pieces of angle iron, or even just a piece of plate to extend or widen the stance of those pillow blocks, where you have much less hanging over past the bearing to the drive wheel. So we've effectively reduced that from, say, 4 or 5 inches of overhang to just about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter from the bearing collar to the inside of the wheel there. And it just takes up a lot more force and gives you a lot less room to flex when you're grinding, and should translate into a much longer life of the shaft, the bearings, and overall just a smoother running and more stable machine. So just to show you real quick what I did, it's really nothing special. I had about a 15-inch piece or so of angle iron I cut in half. So I think these are about 7 inches long after I cut and squared them up. Use the existing holes that I already had for the original positions of the pillow blocks. left the one pretty much in the same spot. Just drilled the holes accordingly. These bolts go through the previous pillow blocks mounting holes, just to bolt the angle iron in place, and then I just mounted it out to the end here. And then one more thing I did just to really tie everything together and stabilize the assembly was to add a second piece of angle across the end here, so we couldn't have any inside flex on either end of the angle there. That was just kind of floating out in space. And then finally, I really tried to mount and bolt everything as far into the angle iron as I could, again to kind of minimize any potential flex there. And in order to do that, I just had to put a real slight chamfer on the inside corner of those pillow blocks, just to match that radius on the inside of the angle iron. Hopefully you can see that. So that was just a couple minutes on my other belt sander over there. Could have used a file or really anything. But that's it for the modification. I think overall it's really going to improve not only the life of the shafts, but the performance of the grinder as a whole. And this is really something I would recommend for anybody with a no-weld grinder sander to go ahead and do. Just a foot long piece or 15-16 inch long piece of angle iron, a couple extra bolts, and that's it. And I guess you could add this other piece, let's say about 5 inches long of angle to kind of stiffen everything up. Or you could use a plate or really anything that you can bolt onto the existing base tube and mount a pillow block to. So that's it, guys. Go ahead and fire it up. Not that you have anything to compare it to, but it is much smoother. And everything's tracking pretty well. This is an older belt, so it's got a little bit of wobble in it. But a brand new belt would take care of that. One other thing I will mention, usually I put in a precision ground and keywayed shaft from Beaumont Metal Works. Unfortunately, those were on back order, so I just went ahead and got a piece of 5/8 cold rolled rod from the local hardware. And I did have to sand it down to make it fit into the bearings. Sanded it down quite a bit, actually. But I was able to get everything together, and everything runs great. Precision ground shaft might run a little smoother. I'm sure that's not perfectly concentric, but perfectly suitable for what I got going now. So that's it, guys. Any questions, comments, please leave them below. This is probably a little bit longer of a video than it needed to be, but this is definitely a much needed improvement, in my opinion, over the original specs, and something that's just too easy and simple not to do. So that's it, guys. We'll see you.